Labeling theory is a sociological framework that explains how being assigned a label can shape a person's identity, behavior, and life outcomes. Developed by sociologists such as Howard Becker and Edwin Lemert, the theory focuses less on why people commit deviant acts and more on how society responds to those acts. The key idea is simple but powerful: people are not inherently deviant or normal, they become defined that way through social reactions. To understand labeling theory, you have to start with the idea that deviance is socially constructed. This means that no behavior is automatically deviant in all situations. Instead, societies create rules, and when someone breaks those rules, others decide whether to label that behavior as deviant. For example, drinking alcohol is acceptable for adults in many places but illegal for minors. The behavior itself doesn't change, only the social definition does. This shows that deviance depends on context, authority, and perception, not just the act. Labeling theory also distinguishes between primary deviance and secondary deviance. Primary deviance refers to the initial act of rule breaking. This could be something minor, like skipping school, or more serious, like theft. At this stage, the act does not necessarily define the person. Many people engage in minor rule breaking without it affecting their identity. However, things change when society reacts strongly and applies a label. Secondary deviance occurs when the individual begins to accept that label and act in accordance with it. For example, if someone is repeatedly called a criminal, they may start to see that identity as permanent and behave in ways that reinforce it. A major implication of labeling theory is that authority figures and institutions have enormous power in shaping people's lives. Police officers, teachers, employers, and medical professionals all have the ability to assign labels that carry long-term consequences. Importantly, labeling is not applied evenly. People from marginalized or lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to be labeled negatively, even when engaging in the same behavior as others. This creates a system where some individuals are more likely to be pushed into negative identities simply because of how they are perceived. One of the most significant consequences of labeling is stigma. A label like felon, dropout, or mentally ill does more than describe a situation, it carries assumptions about a person's character and abilities. These assumptions affect how others interact with the individual. For example, a person with a criminal record may struggle to find a job, not necessarily because they lack skills, but because employers associate the label with risk or unreliability. Over time, these barriers can limit opportunities so severely that the individual has little choice but to continue in the same patterns, reinforcing the label. Another major consequence is the self-fulfilling prophecy. This occurs when a label influences a person's behavior in a way that makes the label come true. If a student is consistently labeled as lazy or trouble, teachers may give them less attention or expect less from them. The student, in turn, may disengage and perform poorly, confirming the original label. The important point here is that the label doesn't just describe reality, it actively shapes it. Labeling can also have deep psychological effects. Being repeatedly defined by a negative label can damage self-esteem and create a sense of inevitability. People may begin to believe that they cannot change or improve, which reduces motivation and increases feelings of isolation. In some cases, individuals may even lean into the label as a way of coping, adopting it as part of their identity because resisting it feels pointless. At a broader level, labeling contributes to systemic inequality. When certain groups are more likely to be labeled as deviant, whether due to race, class, or environment, the effects compound over time. These groups may face higher rates of surveillance, punishment, and exclusion, which reinforces existing social divisions. Labeling theory helps explain why inequality persists even when laws or rules appear neutral on the surface. However, the theory also points toward solutions. If labels can shape negative outcomes, then changing how society labels people can create better ones. This includes focusing on actions rather than identities, example, a person who committed a crime instead of a criminal, reducing unnecessary labeling in schools and workplaces, and creating systems that allow people to move past labels rather than be defined by them permanently. In simple terms, labeling theory shows that the way people are described and treated can have long-term, real-world consequences. Labels are not just words, they influence opportunities, behavior, and identity. Once applied, they can be difficult to escape, which is why understanding and using them carefully matters.